Welcome to the world of probiotic foods. This is Cultured Food Life with your host, Donna Schwenk.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me. And today we're going to be talking about ways to use your extra sourdough starter, because you get extra sourdough starter that you kind of discard when you're feeding your sourdough starter. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you use all your sourdough starter making bread. But a lot of times when you're activating it or feeding it, you'll get too much starter. And so you have all this excess and you don't want to throw it away. And I have a bunch of recipes and ways to use it up and to use it. And you don't really even have to ferment it because it's already fermented. But usually, it's usually like once a week. I make bread, sometimes on Wednesday. I used to do it on Tuesday nights. I'd take my starter out of the fridge to feed it and check it. And you always check it when you take it out of the fridge. And you look at it, see if it has bubbles on the side or on the top. And if there's something called a hooch on the top, which is like a dark liquid. And what that means is if you see this clear dark liquid, it just means that the starter has run out of food. And you should feed it once a week if you're keeping it in your fridge. So no bubbles and then a hooch on top means that the starter is very, very hungry. It doesn't mean it's dead. It just needs to be fed. So I always get ready to feed it whenever I make my bread. Then, like anywhere from my sourdough starter is very bubbly. So I feed it and it gets super bubbly within 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours. But some people may take longer because they may not be fed as often as mine is. And it can take up to like 6 hours, but you'll notice that it's bubbly. And then, you can do something called a float test. And this doesn't always work, but it doesn't mean you have to do this, but it does help you to know if your starter is ready. And what you do is you take a little bit of your starter, just like a pinch, and drop it in a glass of water. And if it floats, then it's really bubbly and really active. It doesn't always have to float for it to be ready to use. If it's really bubbly, and that means you got bubbles on top, you got bubbles on the sides, you can I always put mine in a clear jar so I can see it, then I know it's ready. But I feed mine so often, at least once a week, and because I make bread, and so it's always really healthy and active. And I feed it a ratio of 1-to-1 flour, water, and I have the starter in there. You don't want too much starter in there. You want to give it as much flour and water as you have starter in there. Otherwise, it'll eat up all the nutrients and it'll kind of go flat. But I always do a 1-to-1 ratio. And I'll put the How to Care for Your Sourdough Starter link in this article below. So here's the rule. If you have too much starter compared to the flour and the water that you're adding, your hungry starter consumes all the nutrients and it won't be as bubbly. But honestly, you just need to take care of it. Feed it once a week. Take it out of the fridge, feed it once a week, and then stick it back in there. It just needs a little warmth, some love. Give it a little things that you would just give a little food that it needs, and it will stay very active for you. I don't even have to barely measure my flour and water anymore because mine is just so crazy active all the time. So it's always ready for me to bake with. And the more you use it, the better it will be. And even if it's just once a week, it makes a huge difference. But you got to feed it once a week if it's in the fridge. And it really helps to get a routine going. And I've done this for so many years. It's automatic for me. And it takes like 1 minute to feed it. And I usually bake sometimes once or twice a week. But it's easy for me since I use it often. And if you're struggling to keep your starter bubbly, then you need to check out my FAQ page because I'll give you a lot of help. I know how to make it happy and bubbly, and you can really bring back a lot of starters that have been kind of dormant in the fridge. It takes a little while to do, but usually they can bounce back. And I don't really do very well with other breads like I do sourdough, so I always love to make it because I digest it better. It seems to be lower in glycemic wise for me. It doesn't mess with my blood sugar. I just do very, very well with sourdough. And I use it in a lot of recipes other than bread too, which I'm going to share with you. And I think a lot of foods have been demonized. Two of the biggest ones are wheat and milk. And those are two of the things that have helped me to thrive. And I don't know what I do without them, but fermentation really changes a food. When you take, for instance, when you take milk and you ferment it into kefir, or you make it into yogurt, or once you do that, it dramatically changes the food. For instance, kefir takes the milk, takes out all the lactose, all the sugars, 99.9% lactose free. It adds vitamins like more B vitamins that are previously in there. It adds vitamin C to the milk. This is all through the microbes in the milk when it's doing this. It lowers the sugars almost down to 1, maybe less than 1. That's why it tastes sour and tart to you. And then it loads it with probiotics and compounds that allow you to digest anything you eat with it. It's basically pre-digested. It just literally transforms the milk into a whole different food. And so it's one of my favorite things in the whole world. And the health benefits I've received are so vast and so many that there's no way you're going to ever convince me that it's bad for me. And the same with sourdough bread. The lactobacillus that's in the bread that breaks down all those phthalates and enzyme inhibitors in the bread. It even breaks down parts of the gluten. It makes it more digestible. It helps you to helps to not raise your blood sugar as high. I had a guy this week tell me in an email that the einkorn sourdough bread, and einkorn is the most ancient wheat there is, and all the wheat that we have today is from einkorn wheat because it's all been crossbred with einkorn. And it's interesting that most of the breads that we consume today have like 28 to 42 chromosomes in them. And einkorn wheat only has 14. And there is a lot of studies that show that ancient wheat with its fewer chromosomes have these lower levels of proteins that cause sensitivity in those who struggle with gluten. And in this particular email from this man, he said that the einkorn sourdough bread that he was eating wasn't knocking him out of ketosis, which like normal bread would do. Now, I don't know if this is true. I do know that it's much lower on the glycemic index. I know you're much less likely to have allergies to einkorn wheat because it's interesting how it all kind of works and how that they've changed all the wheat that we eat when they modernized wheat, because einkorn only gave a fifth of the yield of a regular wheat harvest. So they started to cross it with different types of wheats to make these hybridized wheat products that would grow big and yield huge harvests. And so einkorn was harder to harvest and it didn't yield as big of a crop. And so they crossed them with other different kinds of wheat, goat grasses, and all those goat grasses that they crossed, they tried to hibernate them with, had this thing called the D geno, which is a source of gluten problems and intolerance. And it's one of the things that they test for when they do gluten intolerance tests on people. And einkorn doesn't have that. It doesn't have that, so it doesn't test for it. So a lot of people do very, very well on it. But anyway, he said it even didn't raise his blood sugar at all not blood sugar, but he didn't even knock him out of ketosis, which I've never heard of. So I'm not saying it does that, but I thought that was interesting for him to say that he could eat it and it really didn't spike his blood sugar. And let me tell you something else too. Everybody's different depending on the kind of species of bacteria you have in your gut. Certain things may affect you that won't affect somebody else. It's all dependent on what kind of gut bacteria you have, how your body reacts to food, and it's a very, very individual thing. It's not as across the board as we think. This food does this food does that. It really depends on how you digest it. And that depends on what microbes you have that help you digest it. And so it's all an interesting thing that we're all starting to learn, that none of us are the same. We're all very different and have different strengths and weaknesses depending on which foods we eat. So anyway, back to what I was saying. Now I don't even remember where I was at. But anyway, wheat that has been fermented, just like milk that has been fermented is a very different food from the foods that are not fermented. And is one of the reasons I love these foods, because they really do different things because of the microbes that break them down, and also allow us to digest them in ways that otherwise we would not do, because all fermented foods are pre-digested. So it's very easy on the body. Digestion takes a huge amount of energy for the body to do its work. And these foods are basically pre-digested, so they break down easily in the gut. There's not a lot of stress on the body to do it. And so it's one of the benefits of eating fermented foods. Okay, so I want to tell you about some of the recipes I have and what you can do with your extra sourdough starter. I love to use all my extra starter in different ways, and I actually use these a lot. One of the ones I love is to make sourdough waffles, and I have a chocolate kefir sourdough waffle that is absolutely delicious. And this recipe I use for pancakes, I use it for waffles, and I use it for this chocolate waffle. And I'm going to give you all these recipes in the link below. But basically what I do is the night before, if we're going to have, we've been kind of doing pancakes on Sunday. Like, we've been doing it for a while. The last month and a half, I would say, we're having pancake Sunday because my husband got a new griddle outside. So we've been making them outside. But what I do before Saturday night, before I go to bed, I take 4 ounces of my sourdough starter, and you don't have to let it warm up. You don't have to do anything. You just take it straight out of the jar. You add it to a cup of kefir and then a cup of flour, whichever kind of flour you're going to use in your pancakes. I've been using einkorn flour because I love it so much. It makes the best pancakes in the world. But you can use, white flour, whole wheat, whatever you use, sprout flour. It's all wonderful. And then the next morning, when you get up, it's going to be bubbly because the kefir and the sourdough are going to interact together, and they make the highest, fluffiest, yummiest pancakes. And then you add your other ingredients to it in the morning. The baking soda interacts with the kefir and the sourdough starter, so it makes it rise really high. It makes them really fluffy pancakes. And then you add eggs and vanilla and all the other ingredients that you'd want to add. And I usually double this recipe. Now, I use that recipe for the sourdough pancakes, for the waffles, and for the chocolate ones. And you'll have to go see my pictures. They are just so crazy good. They make, it's kind of one of those recipes that I've gotten from generations back. It's been around for a long time. It makes really good pancakes. And there's something about when that baking soda hits the sourdough and the kefir that's in the jar that's been fermenting at night. It gets super active and super bubbly, which is going to make your pancakes and your waffles rise really high. So it's really yummy. Okay, now this one, the peppermint sourdough brownies, and you don't have to add peppermint if you don't like it. You just make the brownies. But these are so good, guys. I love them. And it's got some, a good texture. Everybody likes that brownie texture. I don't know what you call that. But you're basically using 1 cup of sourdough starter with this, and eggs and cocoa powder, and I like to put walnuts, coconut oil. I use a chocolate bar. It's delicious, and I really, really enjoy this recipe. It makes a really good, dense chocolate gooey brownie that I love, and you're just using your sourdough starter. Your excess, the stuff that you have left over, and it makes really good ones. Now, the other recipe I love, oh gosh, guys, I love the sourdough chocolate graham crackers. They are, if you haven't tried my graham cracker recipe, they are so good. And they're kind of super easy to make. And you're using a cup of your sourdough discard, the leftovers that you've got. And you're mixing it with a little bit of coconut sugar or honey, cinnamon, baking soda, flour, and butter, and they taste so fantastic. I can't keep them in my house. Once I make them, they're gone in a day. And I've doubled the recipe, and they're still gone. And they are really good, and they make really good as a base for a pie crust. If you want to, grind them up into little fine pieces and use them with butter to make a pie crust base, it's really fun and easy, and it's really good too. That's one of my favorite ways to use it. Okay, sourdough dumplings. Now, if I make sourdough dumplings in a stew or in a soup, my family goes berserk. They love sourdough dumplings. They just change a soup overnight. It makes it homey and comforting and delicious. And if you've not had sourdough dumplings, you haven't really lived because they're so good. And you can use a cup of sourdough starter with this, with some flour, baking powder, salt, olive oil, 1 egg, and parsley and pepper. And that's all you do. After you make your soup, you just mix these ingredients up and you drop spoonfuls on top of the mixture of your stew. It should be like simmering on the stove. And you cover with a lid until the dumplings have doubled in size, about 15 minutes, and then you serve it. And my family fights over who gets more dumplings. It's really funny. But it's a really comforting, warm dish. We have another cookie. My husband loves snickerdoodle cookies. And these are really fun to make. We use the leftover sourdough starter, half a cup, with some coconut oil, coconut sugar, vanilla. I like to use sprouted whole wheat flour, baking powder, salt. And then we top it after, with the coconut sugar and cinnamon. And they are so yummy. If you like snickerdoodle cookies, these are great. I just actually made this the other day, sourdough starter banana bread, and it makes it super moist. You're putting leftover your ripe bananas with sourdough starter and some flour with baking powder, salt, coconut oil, and I love walnuts in my banana bread. Guys, you should incorporate more walnuts in your diet. Walnuts have special compounds in them that help to stimulate fat burning. They really work very powerfully with the other, grapefruits. Grapefruits and walnuts work really powerful together, but so do bananas. And there's another one that I can't remember offhand. It works very well to stimulate things in your cells that allow you to burn more fat. They're very good for you. And I try to use walnuts a lot because they are really good for you. They're good for your microbiome. They feed it in a powerful way. And I really enjoy adding them to banana bread because it tastes so good. And there's something about the moistness of this because of the addition of the sourdough starter that really makes this a fun thing to make. And it's very comforting. And it's just fun for the family, especially around this time of year. I seem to, for some reason, right around Easter, I am always making banana and zucchini bread, and I'm not sure why, but it seems to be that I do this every time in the springtime. I don't know if I get an overabundance of bananas and zucchini, but I really enjoy making these breads because the bananas make them moist. And actually, you can use the sourdough starter in a zucchini bread too. If you, I think I even have a recipe for that. I have to put that in the link below too. So all of these recipes and using up your starter, I'm sure you could find many ways more to do it. If you do, send me an email and let me know how you use your extra sourdough starter. It's a lot of fun to have all these different types of things that you probably never thought of to make, but they're fun, they're easy, your family will love them. It's very, very enjoyable to use up your sourdough starter and to make these yummy additions to your diet. And with the help of the microbes in the sourdough starter, it makes your dish that you've made or your ingredient much more digestible to the body, much easier on the way that it moves through the body because you've got the extra fiber, you've got the extra probiotics in it, and it just makes digestion a breeze. So check it out. Shoot me an email if you guys have stuff that you do, because I love getting more suggestions and more things that everybody uses their sourdough starters for. It helps everybody. And I'll put those links on my website and make them and try them, and so everybody can enjoy them. So thank you guys for listening. Don't throw away your extra sourdough starter. Use it in some of these recipes, and I hope that helps you to make some yummy recipes too that are good for you. Have a good one. We'll see you next week.